We all know that great bass is one of the key aspects of the audio experience, and bass is the foundation for everything that we hear. It affects tonality, soundstage, dynamics, scale, and more for both music and movies. And I actually think that having a lot of great bass can be one of the key differences between good and great audio experiences. So having subwoofers as part of any audio system makes sense, but it does come with its own set of distinct challenges. And this video was meant to be just a review for a subwoofer from Velodyne called the MiniVee X that I thought could be a great solution for those who haven't been able to make subwoofers work for them, because it's small, nicely styled, not crazy expensive, and it has an auto equalization system built in to help someone get over their biggest hurdle to great bass, their listening room's acoustics. And I knew I wanted to test the MiniVee X for HiFi and home theater duties. And I also wanted to compare it to some other Velodyne subwoofer offerings around the same price. And that ended up being a comparison to this. This is the MicroVee X, which is obviously a very compact subwoofer, one that I can hold in one hand. And what I thought was interesting about this MicroVee X is that it could be the answer to one of the other biggest hurdles to having subwoofers as part of an audio system, the extra big box that you have to have in the room, because I feel like this is a subwoofer that you could easily hide away. But I also know that some other people are bass heads, just like me, and they don't get excited by small subwoofers like these, especially for home theatre. And if that's you, I have also been comparing these small, easy to live with subwoofers to this make a huge impact beast subwoofer, the Impact X15. So in this video, there is likely a subwoofer offering to cater for your differing specific subwoofer needs. But what I was also interested to test is the diversity of these subwoofers. Could one subwoofer do everything for us at around the same price? I think when a manufacturer names their subwoofers Mini and Micro, it could almost be a tongue-in-cheek name, because these are subwoofers after all, and often subwoofers are large things, but that is not the case here. Both of these Velodyne subwoofers I would class as small. I think the best way to show you the size is relative to something that you already know the size of, such as this. The Mini is not that much larger than a standard beer bottle. But I think more interesting is the same size comparison with the Micro, because the reality hits home now for how compact it is, because it's about the same size as a beer bottle. So what are we dealing with here? The MiniVee X features a 350 watt RMS, an 800 watt peak, Class D amplifier, driving an 8-inch custom carbon fiber driver with an 8-inch custom carbon fiber passive radiator. The main driver has a 2-inch voice coil, and the cabinet is braced MDF. And normally it's easy to tell which driver is the active and which driver is the passive, but here they look pretty much the same to me. Round the back, the amplifier plate has a lot of connections, including balanced inputs, a very impressive number actually given the small form factor. And that includes speaker level inputs, so you can connect to the Mini straight from a HiFi amplifier and use the built-in low-pass filter. There is a mic input for using the built-in auto equalizer, and the volume is controlled digitally, either on the back or via the Velodyne app. And the Velodyne app allows you to set up all of the basics, but it also allows you to set up a custom equalizer, which could come in handy. I definitely think it's better to use the app to engage the auto equalization measuring process, because you can do it with a button on the subwoofer amplifier plate, but when you do it, the measuring starts straight away. There's no delay. So your ear is right next to the subwoofer when it starts creating bass notes. So it would be much better if there was maybe a 5-second delay to allow you to get away from the subwoofer. There is an included microphone for the measuring, and it's a better mic than I expected to see, but the holder for it is very strange because there is no way to connect it to a standard microphone stand, as there are no threads. I did find the app just a little buggy, but I liked it. It did make the setup process that little bit easier. And we get all of this with the MiniVee X for the retail price of £1,399. Looking at the MicroVee X, what stands out about this subwoofer is the enclosure, and that it's made from aluminium. That is not something that you see every day. It certainly gives the Micro a distinct aesthetic, like it or not. And I wondered if it helps act as a heatsink for the 300 watt RMS and 800 watt peak Class AB amplifier that's driving a custom 6.5 inch carbon fiber forward firing driver with two 6.5 inch passive radiators that are hidden behind mesh that didn't seem like it was supposed to be removed, so I didn't try. On the rear are again a lot of connections for the sub's ultra compact size, including speaker level inputs, again for connecting to a hi-fi amplifier. Although I'm not a fan of this push style of connector in 2025. The controls here are more simplified compared to the Mini, with a more simple push button volume adjustment. And there is no app control. Instead, there is a remote control included. So this is a far more simplified subwoofer in terms of control, but there is still everything you need here, minus the auto EQ, which is a shame. But Velodyne have included with the MicroVee X their DDCS technology, Digital Direct Control System, which is a technology from their higher end, more expensive subwoofers that's said to reduce distortion. So that is very interesting. And we can have all of this with the MicroVee X for the retail price of £1,399. So the exact same price as the MiniVee X. So that created a fantastic price comparable subwoofer showdown. For testing each subwoofer's hi-fi or music capability, I set up a very simple but high quality hi-fi system. Using the Eversolo DMPA10, as it has very good subwoofer controls, with the Galleon TS-A75 power amplifier, driving the Mission 770 speakers, the new ones. And this is a very nice hi-fi system, one that I knew could easily benefit from a good subwoofer. So I was giving each subwoofer a great chance to shine. I started with the MicroVee, and the first thing that you can't miss is how tiny it is compared to the Mission speakers. So this doesn't look like a very balanced system visually, but set up differently, you could easily hide the Micro out of the way. And also some of you might question this subwoofer's position in my room. And I have measured this room hundreds of times and know that that is a pretty good spot in the room for a single sub. But more importantly, it actually gets the subwoofer away from the room's boundaries as much as possible. So that allows me to hear more of the subwoofer and less of the room, and that is really important. And I connected to the MicroVee X using its LFE direct input because I was using the Eversolo to do all of the controls and settings. So similar to how you would do it maybe with a home theater or AV receiver. And it's actually said on the website that is the best connection inputs. It took me about an hour to get the MicroVee set up properly and time aligned by ear. I used the Eversolo subwoofer output set to mixed, with the subwoofer kicking in at 60 Hz, which is a little lower than I normally like to use with the Missions, but it sounded perfect there for creating an excellent seamless blend between the speakers and the subwoofer. I was running the MicroVee just under its maximum volume for its output to balance and for it to add the bass I wanted to take the Mission sound to the next level. But just one tiny MicroVee could do it. The cool thing about using the Eversolo is that in the app you can turn the subwoofer on and off, so you get an instant change, an instant difference between the subwoofer on and off, so perfect for listening to any differences. And with the MicroVee X turned off, the system definitely sounded more hollow in the bass and in the mid-range, so less well balanced from top to bottom. And interestingly, you could hear where there was a lot less important bass coming from the system, deeper than what the missions would deliver as well. So that showed that the MicroVee X, just one of them, in the middle of the room was able to extend what the missions are doing to support them and deliver a better bass in the listening room. And that is impressive considering that the missions have 8-inch mid-bass drivers in them. So this is impressive stuff. And this test showed to me that the little MicroVee X is doing a great job for its size of making the missions sound like larger speakers by adding the bass that they are not doing enough of. The bass from the MicroVee is very fast. It's what I call speaker-like bass. It starts and stops very fast, and it can go quite deep with a surprising authority that you do feel on your body. On occasion, the bass was a touch boxy when I was really pushing the limits with crazy heavy bass music from Stormzy as an example, although that music is a little rough in production on purpose. But even with that style of heavy bass music, in the main, the MicroVee kept up. Being honest, did it sound like I was listening to much bigger, heavyweight subwoofers that really hit the room with a lot of pressure? Definitely not. But it didn't sound like I was listening to a tiny micro subwoofer either. I would say it sounded like I was listening to larger tower speakers rather than, stand mount speakers. So the subwoofer was very fast, speaker-like bass, as I mentioned, and it was definitely adding something very important to the overall sonic picture. But how did it compare to the, in inverted commas, larger but still MiniVee X? Well, straight away you can tell these are subwoofers cut from a similar cloth. The Mini is similar in that it's looking to be a fast and detailed subwoofer, more than a deep, big hitter, which is totally understandable given the small form factor. It is a lightning fast subwoofer, but one that does it with a nice musical flow. It's not mechanical sounding at all. It delivers a very musically pleasing, articulate bass that is very transparent, and it helped to create a more 3D soundstage in my room, doing that better than the Mission speakers on their own, and I would also say about 1 or 2 marks better than the smaller MicroVee did. Then you also get the benefit of the slightly larger driver and subwoofer, and how that hits the room with more deep bass and pressure overall. So it sounds a little more substantial as a subwoofer overall, and how that gives the system a bigger overall scale. I think it did this about 1 or 2 marks better than the Micro 2. It still doesn't sound like a large subwoofer in the way it hits the room with its pressure, but that's not always a good thing either, because a lot of deep bass pressure from a subwoofer can be the thing that causes you the problems, and it can also piss off your neighbours. But at times you might want a lot of bass in your music and movies, maybe during the day when you're in the mood for it. What the Mini offers over the Micro is the ability to push more bass out of it as you go higher with the volume, without the same audible compression limit that you do get from the Micro. So you feel more confident asking for more from the Mini as you turn the volume up, again with bass heavy music. But the slight downside to the Mini is it sounds quite reserved, and it seemed to want a higher input signal to get the best out of it, so I had to turn the subwoofer level up in the Eversolo app, much more than I did with the Micro. And I had the Mini's volume set at just under maximum too to get the best performance out of it. And it was working very hard at times with music like Back to Basics from Fredo. Even with a crazy amount of driver action, I didn't hear any X-Max or nasty mechanical noises from overdriving the system until the volume was up louder than I would generally listen, which is very loud. So that is something good here about these subwoofers' overall design. So comparing the two, given the price is the same, from an outright value proposition, if you can have the larger MiniVee X, that is the one to get in my opinion. It's clearly the better sub of the two for its overall performance and capability. And I have not even spoken about the auto EQ system yet, because that just works. And a system this simple almost feels too simple for someone like me who's done so much, system calibration over the years. But it is a really simple, easy to use system that just works. I do think it would be better if there was a more obvious way to turn the auto EQ on and off so that you can listen to the difference. But the difference I heard was that it helped to fill a bass null that I had with the subwoofer there at 60 Hertz, and that was an audible difference. You could hear where that was just less missing with the auto EQ on. But most important for me was that the difference it made was really very subtle. It didn't change the volume or do anything weird. There was no negative side effects to using it. There was just that very subtle but obvious improvement that it made. So that was great. Now maybe in a more challenging, non-acoustically treated room where you've got a lot more bass problems, maybe the effect of it would be much more significant. I really cannot say. But for me, less is more. And the fact that it just worked, and it worked in a way that I would leave it on, says enough to me. In summary then, it's no surprise to me that I preferred the bigger sub of the two, because there is no replacement for displacement. However, if it's the micro or no sub at all, the micro can give you a fair portion of what the Mini does from the smaller chassis, but there is a price premium that comes along with that. I think both subwoofers would be better used in pairs and with a closer to a wall proximity for more deep bass outputs. So from this HiFi system testing, I realised there was no point testing the MicroVee for big home cinema expectation usage. But I did want to test the MiniVee there because I wondered if it could do it if I had more than one of them. It's not easy for me to test home theatre at home anymore, so I travelled to Witham in Essex to use the dedicated cinema of the HiFi dealership Reference Audio. And they have a big cinema room that has top-of-the-range Bowers speakers behind a 4-metre screen and Bowers in-ceiling for Dolby Atmos. And the system was mostly Macintosh with an Arcam power amplifier as well. So this is a much larger room than in my home with a big system. So a big test for any subwoofer to keep up with. And as Reference Audio are a Velodyne dealer, it was handy to have access to a second MiniVee for testing and also access to a subwoofer to set some kind of price reference. And that subwoofer was the Impact X15 that costs a little more at £1,599. The Impact X15, no surprise really, features a 15-inch paper driver with a 3-inch voice coil that is front firing. And I do love how this driver looks and how it feels when you give it that little tap with your hands and the thud sound that it makes. It really reminds me of the PA speakers I built back in the day. However, the cabinet construction is maybe not the best feeling when you also tap it. It has a sense of hollow about it. And the finish is quite nice to the touch because it has like a softness in your hands, but it's just a wrap of sorts. It's not a lovely paint finish. So this is definitely not the prettiest looking subwoofer of the three. And this is a rear ported bass reflex design with a 550 watt RMS and 1000 watt dynamic Class D amplifier that has a very basic set of controls and connections, again including those push style speaker level inputs that I really don't like. What I did like was the blue indicator type of screen on the front that clearly shows you the volume, but you have control over its brightness to fully dim it off once you're set up, so that blue light doesn't annoy you in the dark for serious movie watching. And speaking of movie watching, I was only supposed to use this subwoofer to set some kind of reference point, some expectation level for a similar priced Velodyne. But I ended up spending about 4 hours watching all different types of movie scenes and clips and content because this subwoofer, for movies anyway, was just immense. There is no other word for it. The bass was immense. And I was absolutely loving it for how much scale and grandiose it gave the whole system. It was like being at the cinema with the huge screen and a huge sound, but only much better because it's easier to make amazing sound for one person than it is possible for 100 people at the cinema. So there's not that obvious compromise that you always get with the audio at a commercial cinema. And speaking of commercial cinema, I actually went to watch Dune 2 at my local IMAX, and it was one of the best cinema experiences I have had to date because of the quality of the experience. I would say it was epically good. And watching the same scenes on this system had the same level of impact and massiveness and scale because of the bass and how that made this system sound so big and full and weighty and massively impactful. It was just pinning me in the chair with its presence and majesty of it all. And the bass, like I said, was immense from just the one Impact X15. And I was, without realising, playing it probably closer to its maximum, but it was just immense for filling this big cinema with, like I said, lovely, rich, full, pleasing pressure feeling on your body. It was immense. However, had I had two of them, I could have worked each subwoofer less hard to deliver that same experience, so there would have been better bass control and even better kick when you needed it. But boy, I was damn impressed. Considering the simplicity of the setup, I was damn impressed by just how impactful, it says it in the name, but I was really very impressed. But the problem now was that this set such a crazy high expectation bar. So how did a pair of MiniVee X stack up to this? And of course, I'm not stupid. I know this is not the type of room someone will look to use subwoofers that are described as mini for home theater. However, I thought if two of them do okay here, then in a normal living room cinema system, they should be very good. And here is what's interesting about this comparison. The bass was totally different from the MiniVee, and in some ways it was better and some ways worse. A lot of that massive impact and grandiose and scale was missing for me. However, where the MiniVee X was a much faster subwoofer, they actually got out of the way of the speakers more. So there was more small details coming through from the speakers than with the big, weighty, thick, rich subwoofer that was masking that just a little bit. And obviously I couldn't hear that it was masking it until I did the comparison. So yes, it wasn't as big or as full or as heavy hitting, but I could see some people preferring the more tight, articulate, fast bass over that big kind of full and weightiness. Personally, I would go with the big full weighty for a big cinema like this and then calibrate the clarity out of it. But like in a straight comparison, look, these were the main differences. So the MiniVee X, even though the bass output was noticeably less, they were still doing a very good job actually for this size and scale of cinema in this size and scale of room. But being a bass head, I definitely loved the impact from the X15 for movies. But as this review is all about diversity, I also needed to know how that subwoofer might work for hi-fi system usage. So as a final test, I set up the Impact X in the same hi-fi system as before to see how it would fare for music. And it was pretty good. It certainly delivered the deepest notes with the most presence and authority from all three subwoofers here. And it delivers a nice, pleasing tone to deep bass notes too. And it has a nice vibe about how it sounds. And it's a surprisingly transparent subwoofer given its kind of massive output capability. And it was, hitting the room deep here a little bit more than probably is ideal. But I think I was struggling to make it fully disappear. It was like maybe just a little bit too slow to fully keep up with the Mission speakers. Not all of the time, just sometimes. And that meant at times my ear was drawn to the subwoofer rather than hearing like a fully cohesive just bass in the room. I think the two smaller subs being much faster definitely disappeared better. It was more like hearing or listening to a fully cohesive system. I could tell that because I was looking to turn the subwoofer down, and really I wanted to turn it up more to let it really do its thing. So look, I don't want to sell the Impact X15 short. It was doing a very good job. I just don't think it's as well suited to a straight hi-fi usage, or at least in this room, compared to the other two. However, as part of a well-calibrated cinema system where you listen to music as well, I think they could be very good there. And it would certainly add a lot of impact and scale for music, which is very important. I think it's just more of a beast that needs more taming. Time for a conclusion and to answer the big question. Can one subwoofer do it all from any of these three? I think yes and no. In a smaller room like this one, the MiniVee is the closest to offering the most. It's certainly the most versatile and therefore the best overall value bang for buck from the three. I think if you're a normal person with a normal living room with neighbours that you're trying not to piss off too much, one MiniVee X, or really two of them, would be better. I think would give you a great overall bass experience for music and movies. And that auto EQ system can definitely make that easier for you, which makes the Micro and the Impact more situation specific subwoofers, I feel, when we do the comparison. But I do think the Impact X15 is a very big value bang for buck, heavy hitting subwoofer if that's what you're looking for cinema. I really was impressed by its performance. And also I suppose the MicroVee probably then becomes the subwoofer for those people who can't have subwoofers because of the size of the box, because I think it still delivers a lot of what the Mini does in a smaller package really, and small and subwoofers don't normally go together, so there is definitely a place for it, but like I said, there is a premium that comes with it too. So I hope this has been, interesting as a long video. I know it's long. There's a huge amount to cover. I hope it's been interesting in some ways for you. If you've enjoyed it, hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more.